Mark had always believed in the balance they had as a family. He worked long hours as a project manager, ensuring their financial stability, while Sarah stayed home, managing their two boys, Logan, 12, and Ethan, 10. She was the hands-on parent, the one who attended PTA meetings, field trips, and teacher conferences. It was a partnership that had worked for over a decade. But lately, something felt off. It started a month ago when Sarah began claiming the school had been calling more often than usual. Logan and Ethan were bright kids but prone to the occasional mischief. A prank here, a detention there, it wasn't unheard of. But the frequency of these calls had suddenly spiked. Every week, Sarah would announce some new disciplinary issue and head off to the school in the late evening, leaving Mark to manage dinner and bedtime routines. At first, he didn't question it. Boys will be boys, he thought. But after the third, urgent meeting, in as many weeks, Mark started noticing inconsistencies. One evening, Sarah returned home after 10 p.m., her hair perfectly in place, her lipstick freshly applied. Logan and Ethan were long asleep, and Mark was waiting in the living room. "So, what did the school say this time?" he asked, keeping his tone casual. "Same old story," Sarah replied, slipping out of her heels. Logan didn't finish his homework, and Ethan was talking back to his teacher. "They're thinking about stricter consequences." Mark frowned. That didn't sound like their boys. "I'll talk to them in the morning." Sarah hesitated for a moment before brushing past him. "Sure, if you think it'll help." The next morning, over breakfast, Mark casually brought it up. "So, what's this about unfinished homework and talking back? The school's apparently losing patience with you too." Logan and Ethan exchanged confused looks. "Dad, I finished all my homework yesterday," Logan said, his voice defensive. "I even showed it to Mom before dinner. And I didn't talk back to anyone," Ethan added. "I've been on my best behavior because I want to go to Jake's birthday party next weekend." Mark narrowed his eyes. "Are you sure? Your mom said the school's been calling her about this stuff." Logan shrugged. "They haven't called her about us in weeks. Maybe they're talking about someone else." Ethan nodded. "Yeah, we haven't been in trouble at all." Mark's stomach twisted. If the boys weren't causing problems, why was Sarah lying? Over the next few weeks, Mark kept a close eye on Sarah's school meetings. He started noticing patterns. She would dress up more than usual, wearing perfume, makeup, and jewelry she typically reserved for date nights. And she always left around the same time, after dinner but before bedtime, claiming the school needed to meet urgently. Every time she came home, she had a vague excuse ready. "Logan's grades are slipping," she'd say one night. "Ethan's being disruptive in class," she'd insist another time. But her explanations never seemed to add up, and her timing felt suspicious. Mark's frustration grew. He wanted to confront her directly, but if he was wrong, the accusation could damage their marriage. No, he needed proof, something undeniable. One night, as Sarah grabbed her purse and coat, Mark stopped her. "Do you want me to come with you? I can talk to the principal too." Her reaction was immediate. She froze, her hand hovering over the doorknob, before forcing a smile. "No, it's fine. It's just routine stuff. No need to make it a big deal." Her deflection only confirmed his doubts. Mark decided to dig deeper. He called the school the following day during his lunch break. "Hi, this is Mark Daniels, Logan and Ethan's father," he said to the secretary. "I wanted to follow up on some of the meetings my wife's been having with the teachers. Is there anything specific I should know about?" The secretary sounded genuinely puzzled. "Meetings? I don't have anything on the calendar for Sarah. In fact, we haven't had any issues with Logan or Ethan this term. They're doing great." Mark gripped the phone tighter. "So, there haven't been any disciplinary problems recently?" "None that I'm aware of," she replied cheerfully. They're wonderful boys. Mark hung up, his chest tight with anger. She was lying to him, but why? Where was she going if not to the school? That evening, as Sarah prepared to leave for another meeting, Mark whispered to his sons after she left. "You're not going to school tomorrow. I have a plan." The boys exchanged curious glances but nodded. "Okay, Dad," Logan said. "What's going on?" "Don't worry about it," Mark replied, ruffling their hair. "Just trust me." The next morning, after Sarah dropped the boys off at a friend's house for a sleepover, Mark began setting his plan into motion. First, he borrowed a small hidden camera from a colleague, claiming he needed it for work. Then, he began searching for answers. He knew Sarah had a habit of leaving her phone unlocked while showering. That evening, he waited until she was in the bathroom, steam fogging up the mirror, before picking up her phone. His hands trembled as he scrolled through her messages. And then he saw it, a string of texts between Sarah and an unsaved number. "Can't wait to see you tonight," one message read. "I'll book the room again." "Same place." Sarah had replied. Mark's stomach turned. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. His wife was seeing someone else. He set the phone down carefully, his mind racing. Now, he didn't just want answers, he wanted revenge. Mark paced the living room, his thoughts a whirlwind of anger and disbelief. He clutched his phone, watching the tiny blue dot representing Sarah's location move further and further away from their neighborhood. The tracker app confirmed what he dreaded: she wasn't going anywhere near the school. Instead, her route ended at a shabby motel on the outskirts of town. Mark's grip tightened on his phone as he stared at the screen. This was no misunderstanding. Sarah had been lying to him, and now he had the proof to back up his suspicions. But a tracker wasn't enough, he needed something undeniable. Something that left no room for excuses. That evening, as Sarah prepared to leave for yet another school meeting, Mark played his part, masking his growing rage with feigned indifference. He sat on the couch, flipping through the channels, barely glancing at her as she walked into the room. She was dressed sharper than ever, a fitted blouse, a pencil skirt that hugged her figure, and heels that clicked sharply against the hardwood floor. Her perfume filled the air, a scent she hadn't worn in months, claiming it was too strong for everyday use. Now, it hung heavily around her like an accusation. "Another call to school?" Mark asked, keeping his voice even. Sarah hesitated for just a moment before nodding. "Yeah. Logan's teacher said it's urgent. I won't be long." Mark glanced up briefly, feigning disinterest. "Okay. Tell them I'll schedule a meeting next time. I'd like to hear what they have to say firsthand." Sarah froze for a heartbeat before quickly recovering, forcing a smile. "Sure, I'll let them know." Mark watched her leave, his gut churning. He gave her a 5-minute head start before grabbing his car keys. The hidden camera in his pocket weighed heavily as he climbed into his car and followed the tracker's blinking dot. The drive to the motel was excruciatingly slow. Every red light felt like an eternity as Mark tried to stay far enough behind Sarah's car to avoid suspicion. His hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, his mind racing with 1,000 scenarios of what he might find. When he finally reached the motel, he parked across the street in the shadows of a dimly lit parking lot. The rundown building looked exactly like what he'd imagined, a place for secrets and lies. The neon vacancy sign flickered faintly, casting an eerie glow on the cracked pavement. Mark's heart pounded as he spotted Sarah's car. She had parked in the back, near a row of rooms with their curtains drawn tightly shut. As he watched, the door to one of the rooms opened, and a man stepped out, a tall, clean-cut figure Mark didn't recognize. He wore a button-up shirt and slacks, looking polished yet casual, like someone who thought he could charm his way out of any situation. The man waved at Sarah as she got out of her car, smiling broadly. Sarah returned the smile, a smile Mark hadn't seen directed at him in years, and walked toward the man. They embraced briefly, her hand lingering on his arm, before they disappeared into the motel room together. Mark felt a surge of anger so strong it threatened to overwhelm him. He forced himself to take a deep breath, gripping the hidden camera tightly. He couldn't act on emotion, not yet. He needed to think clearly. This wasn't just about confronting Sarah, it was about making sure she couldn't twist the narrative. Mark waited in his car for several minutes, letting the initial wave of fury subside. When he was sure the coast was clear, he slipped out and approached the motel. He pulled his hoodie up to shield his face from the cameras he'd noticed above the entrance, his footsteps careful and deliberate. He found the room number easily enough. Sarah's laugh, soft and flirtatious, guided him like a beacon. He crouched near the window, careful to stay hidden behind the thick bushes lining the walkway. Slowly, he raised the hidden camera and started recording. The curtains weren't completely closed, leaving a small gap that allowed him to see into the room. His stomach turned as he took in the scene. Sarah sat on the edge of the bed, her shoes off and her legs crossed casually. The man stood close, leaning over her, speaking in low tones that Mark couldn't hear but didn't need to. Then, the man reached out, brushing a strand of hair from Sarah's face. She tilted her head up, smiling, before pulling him closer. Mark's hand trembled, but he held the camera steady. He forced himself to keep watching, to document every damning second. When the man leaned in and kissed her, the betrayal hit Mark like a physical blow. He pressed record harder, as if imprinting the moment deeper into the device's memory. Satisfied he had enough evidence, Mark slowly retreated to his car. He sat in the driver's seat, staring blankly at the motel as the gravity of what he'd just witnessed sank in. His wife, the mother of his children, the woman he had trusted with his life, was cheating on him. But instead of tears, all Mark felt was a cold, calculated resolve. This wasn't going to break him, it was going to break her. Mark wasn't done yet. He needed more than a single video, he needed context. He needed irrefutable evidence that would destroy any chance of Sarah denying what she had done. He waited in his car until Sarah and the man emerged from the room. They lingered near her car, talking and laughing like teenagers sneaking out past curfew. Mark hit record again, capturing their every move. When they finally parted ways, Mark followed the man's car at a safe distance, noting his license plate and where he drove. The man eventually stopped at a suburban home a few miles away. Mark parked discreetly down the street, watching as the man entered the house. A woman greeted him at the door, a toddler clinging to her leg. Mark's stomach churned. The man wasn't just having an affair with Sarah, he had a family of his own. With one final photo of the man's house, Mark ended his surveillance for the night. He had everything he needed, the video, the location, the man's identity. The next step was clear. Mark didn't go straight home. Instead, he drove to a nearby diner, where he sat in a booth with his laptop. He uploaded the video and photos, encrypting them and saving them to multiple locations. If Sarah tried to deny anything, he would make sure the evidence was impossible to erase. As he sipped his coffee, staring at the damning footage on his screen, Mark's mind began to shift from discovery to strategy. He wasn't just going to confront Sarah, he was going to destroy the perfect facade she had built for herself. This wasn't just revenge. It was justice. Mark woke up on the morning of the school assembly with a strange calmness. The storm of emotions that had consumed him since discovering Sarah's betrayal was now tightly bottled, replaced by a cold determination. Today was the day everything would come to light. He had spent the last 2 days meticulously preparing. The video evidence he'd gathered, grainy but unmistakable, was ready. Mark had edited the footage to leave no doubt about Sarah's actions while sparing his kids from any explicit details. This wasn't about humiliating them, this was about exposing the lies. As Sarah rushed to get ready for the assembly, Mark watched her from the kitchen table, his face a mask of indifference. She hummed a tune as she applied her makeup, seemingly carefree, oblivious to the storm brewing. "I'll see you there later, right?" she asked casually, adjusting her blouse in the mirror. Yeah, Mark said, his tone neutral. I wouldn't miss it. She smiled, grabbing her purse and giving him a quick peck on the cheek before heading out the door. Mark's jaw tightened as he watched her car pull out of the driveway. The boys were still upstairs getting ready, but Mark had made a decision: they weren't going. He climbed the stairs and knocked on Logan's door. Hey, change of plans. You're staying home today. Logan opened the door, confused. What? Why? We were supposed to get awards. Mark knelt to meet his son's eyes, forcing a reassuring smile. I need you and your brother to trust me on this. Stay here, okay? We'll celebrate your achievements later. Reluctantly, Logan nodded, sensing the seriousness in his father's voice. Ethan, younger and more easygoing, didn't put up a fight when Mark told him the same. With the boys settled in front of the TV, Mark grabbed the USB drive from his office and headed out. The ride to the school was surreal. The familiar streets blurred past him as his focus narrowed on what was about to unfold. He didn't feel nervous, he felt righteous. The school gym buzzed with the energy of parents and students gathering for the assembly. Mark slipped in unnoticed, keeping to the back of the room. Sarah sat near the front with other parents, her polished exterior perfectly in place. Mr. Grant, her partner in betrayal, was seated with the faculty, chatting amiably with his colleagues. Mark scanned the room and found the projector set up near the stage. The tech station was manned by a distracted AV student, scrolling through his phone. Mark seized the moment, slipping the USB into the system while pretending to inspect the equipment. The student barely glanced up, assuming Mark was part of the staff. He clicked a few keys to queue up the file. The innocuous name on the USB, Assembly Slideshow 2023, ensured no one would question it. Satisfied, Mark stepped back into the shadows, his heart pounding. The assembly began with the principal giving a cheerful welcome, followed by speeches from teachers and students. Mark's eyes never left Sarah, who laughed and clapped at all the right moments, completely unaware of what was coming. Then the principal announced, and now, let's take a moment to celebrate our students' achievements with a slideshow. Mark's grip tightened on the back of a chair as the lights dimmed. The projector hummed to life, and the screen flickered on. The first frame wasn't of smiling students or colorful charts. Instead, it was a video. The sound of muffled laughter filled the room. Parents murmured in confusion as the grainy footage played. On the screen, Sarah's face appeared, unmistakable. She was seated on a motel bed, laughing as she leaned toward a man, Mr. Grant. His face came into view as he leaned in to kiss her. The camera angle shifted slightly, showing them embracing intimately. Gasps erupted across the gym. Parents whispered furiously, shielding their children's eyes. Teachers froze, their expressions ranging from shock to horror. The principal leapt to his feet, frantically gesturing to the AV student to stop the video. But it kept playing. Sarah's face turned ashen as she realized what was happening. Her perfect composure shattered in an instant. She shot to her feet, her chair clattering loudly on the gym floor. "Turn it off," she shrieked, her voice echoing over the chaos. Mr. Grant, seated among his colleagues, looked like he had been struck by lightning. His face flushed red, and he sank lower in his chair, as though trying to disappear. Mark stayed at the back, arms crossed, watching the scene unfold with grim satisfaction. The video continued for a few more seconds before cutting to black. The silence that followed was deafening. Then came the principal's voice, tight with anger. "Who did this? Who is responsible?" Sarah spun around, her wild eyes scanning the crowd. They locked on Mark. For a moment, her expression was unreadable, a mix of fury, fear, and disbelief. Mark stepped forward, his calm demeanor in stark contrast to the chaos around him. "That would be me," he said, his voice carrying across the room. The gym fell silent. All eyes turned to Mark as he walked toward the stage, his footsteps measured and deliberate. "Mark, what are you doing?" Sarah hissed, her face pale. He stopped in front of her, his gaze icy. "Telling the truth, Sarah. Something you've clearly forgotten how to do." The whispers grew louder, rippling through the crowd like wildfire. "This is inappropriate," the principal sputtered. "We need to clear the room." "Inappropriate?" Mark cut him off. "You want to talk about inappropriate? How about a teacher carrying on an affair with a married parent? How about my wife lying to me and our children, sneaking off to meet him at motels while pretending to attend school meetings?" The principal opened and closed his mouth, at a loss for words. Mark's voice rang out across the gym, cutting through the murmurs and gasps. He stepped forward from the shadows, his face calm but his tone sharp enough to cut glass. "Looks like the school meetings weren't about discipline, were they, Sarah?" he said, his gaze locking onto his wife. His words were laced with venom, each syllable delivered with icy precision. "Care to explain this to our kids?" The room fell silent as all eyes turned to Sarah. She looked like a deer caught in headlights, her hands trembling as she clutched her purse. Her lips parted, but no words came out. The carefully constructed mask she wore for the world, perfect mother, devoted wife, had shattered in front of everyone. "Mark," she finally managed to stammer, her voice barely audible. It's not what it looks like." Mark's laugh was cold and humorless. "Not what it looks like? That's your defense? What part of sneaking off to a motel with another man am I misunderstanding?" Sarah's face turned ghostly pale. She opened her mouth to respond, but Mark didn't give her the chance. "You lied, Sarah. To me. To Logan and Ethan. To everyone here," he said, his voice rising slightly but still controlled. "All these weeks, you made me believe you were going to the school to fix problems with our boys. But the only thing you were fixing was your rendezvous schedule with Mr. Grant." The crowd shifted uncomfortably. Some parents whispered to each other, while others stood frozen, too stunned to react. The principal, still flustered, tried to regain control of the situation. "Mr. Daniels, please, let's." Mark silenced him with a raised hand. "No. I'm not done yet." He turned his gaze toward Mr. Grant, who was attempting to slip quietly out of his chair. "And where do you think you're going?" Mark said sharply, his eyes narrowing. "Running away? Brave move, considering you just destroyed 2 families today." Mr. Grant froze mid-step, his face flushing a deep red. "Look, this isn't the place." "Not the place?" Mark interrupted, his voice dripping with contempt. "Oh, it was the place when you thought you could get away with it. Now you want to slink off like a coward. Sit down." Grant hesitated but eventually sank back into his chair, his shoulders hunched. His colleagues stared at him, some with pity, others with barely concealed disgust. Sarah's breath came in shallow gasps as she tried to muster a response. "Mark, I'm sorry," she said, her voice breaking. I made a mistake." Mark's eyes blazed with fury, but he kept his tone steady. "A mistake? That's what you call this? A mistake is forgetting to pay a bill or burning dinner. This was a choice, Sarah. A deliberate, calculated choice." Tears spilled down Sarah's cheeks. "I didn't mean for this to happen," she pleaded, her voice trembling. It just got out of control." Mark's jaw tightened. "Save the tears. You weren't crying when you betrayed our marriage. When you lied to me, to our boys, to everyone who trusted you. Were you crying when you snuck off to that motel with him?" Sarah covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking as sobs racked her body. But Mark didn't budge, his anger overriding any pangs of sympathy. "You lied, Sarah," he continued, his voice growing colder. "You told me you were going to the school to fix things. All the while, you were tearing our family apart. The room erupted in hushed whispers. Parents leaned toward each other, exchanging shocked glances. A few teachers looked away, clearly uncomfortable with the unfolding drama. The principal stepped forward, his face pale. "Mr. Daniels, we should." Mark cut him off again. "You think I care about saving face right now? My kids aren't here, so they won't have to hear this firsthand. But everyone else? Everyone deserves to know the truth." He turned back to Sarah, his expression unyielding. "You've humiliated me. You've humiliated Logan and Ethan. Did you even think about them, Sarah? About what this would do to them if they found out? Or were you too busy playing house with him?" Sarah's sobs intensified, but she didn't respond. Her silence spoke louder than any words she could have mustered. Mark pointed at Mr. Grant. "And you," he said, his voice like a whip. "How long has this been going on? Weeks? Months?" Grant stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. I don't. "Don't bother lying," Mark snapped. "Because I already know the answer. I have the texts, the video, everything. And trust me, the school board will know about this, too. Let's see how long you keep your job after they find out you've been using your position to prey on married women." Grant's face drained of color, and he slumped further into his chair. The principal finally regained his voice. "I think it's best if we all take a moment to step back and..." "Step back," Mark said, his voice rising. "This doesn't get swept under the rug. Not for her. Not for him. Actions have consequences, and they're about to face every single one of them." He turned to Sarah one last time, his voice soft but laced with finality. "I hope it was worth it, Sarah. Because the life we built together. It's over." Without waiting for a response, Mark turned on his heel and walked toward the exit. The gym doors creaked open, and the murmurs of the crowd grew louder as he disappeared into the sunlight. Behind him, Sarah crumpled into her chair, her sobs echoing in the otherwise silent room. Mr. Grant stared straight ahead, his expression hollow. Mark didn't look back. He had done what he came to do. The truth was out, and the damage was done. Now, it was time to move forward, without her. Mark drove home after the explosive confrontation, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that his knuckles turned white. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving a hollow ache in his chest. He replayed the scene at the school gym in his mind, the gasps, Sarah's sobs, the frozen look on Mr. Grant's face. It had all gone exactly as he planned, but the satisfaction he thought he'd feel was muted. There was no undoing the betrayal, no fixing what was already broken. When he arrived home, the house was silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. Logan and Ethan were still engrossed in their video games, oblivious to the storm brewing outside their small world. Mark set his briefcase down on the kitchen counter, opened his laptop, and emailed his lawyer the video and accompanying evidence. "Use this to ensure custody," Mark typed, his jaw tightening. "I won't let her take the boys from me." The divorce papers were already prepared and sitting in his office. Mark had spent the last 2 nights poring over the details with his lawyer, ensuring the custody agreement would give Sarah minimal influence. The video would solidify his case. Her betrayal wasn't just about him, it was about what it could do to their family, to their boys. Later that evening, Sarah came home. She was disheveled, her makeup smeared, and her eyes red and swollen. She looked at Mark like a drowning person reaching for a lifeline, but his face was a stone wall. "Mark, please," she began, her voice hoarse. "We need to talk." He crossed his arms, standing in the middle of the living room. "Talk? Now you want to talk? You didn't seem interested in talking when you were lying to my face for weeks. What could you possibly say that I haven't already seen for myself?" Tears spilled down her cheeks. "I made a mistake. I never meant for it to go this far. I was lost, and he made me feel special. Mark's laugh was sharp and bitter. Mistakes are accidents, Sarah. This wasn't a mistake. It was a choice. Over and over again, you chose to lie. You chose to betray me, to betray our family. She sank onto the couch, her hands trembling. It didn't mean anything, Mark. I swear. It was just a distraction. Please, don't let this ruin everything we've built. Mark's eyes narrowed, his voice icy. Everything we've built. You ruined it the moment you walked into that motel. Don't you dare put this on me. You destroyed this marriage, Sarah, not me. But the boys, she whispered. Don't take them from me. I'm still their mother. Mark shook his head, his anger tempered only by his resolve. A mother who abandoned them for some cheap fling. You didn't just cheat on me, Sarah. You lied to Logan and Ethan, used them as an excuse for your affair. Do you even realize what you've done? Sarah sobbed, her shoulders shaking. I'll do anything to make it right. Please, Mark. I'll go to counseling. I'll do whatever it takes. He stared at her for a long moment, his heart cold. There's no fixing this. The divorce papers are ready. You'll get them tomorrow. And if you fight me on custody, I'll make sure the court sees the video. Every second of it. Her face crumpled, and she collapsed into her hands, but Mark didn't waver. You made your bed, Sarah. Now you get to lie in it. As for Mr. Grant, the fallout came swiftly. Word of the affair spread like wildfire through the school and the community. Parents were outraged that a teacher had engaged in such behavior, especially with the mother of students at the school. The school board acted decisively. Mr. Grant was suspended pending an investigation, but the evidence was so damning that it was clear he wouldn't be returning. His career was in ruins, and his once respected reputation was in tatters. Mark heard through mutual acquaintances that Mr. Grant's wife had thrown him out of their home and filed for divorce. The man's smug arrogance, so evident in the video, had crumbled under the weight of his own actions. For Mark, it was a small consolation. Mr. Grant had lost everything, but so had Sarah. And in many ways, so had he. That night, Mark sat his boys down in the living room. Logan and Ethan sensed that something was wrong, the tension in the house was palpable. Dad? Logan asked hesitantly. What's going on? Mark took a deep breath, forcing himself to stay calm. Boys, I need to talk to you about something important. It's about your mom and me. Ethan's eyes widened. Are you getting divorced? Mark nodded slowly, the words heavy in his throat. Yes, Ethan. Your mom and I are getting divorced. I know this is going to be hard for you to understand, but sometimes, people make bad choices. And those choices hurt the people they love. Logan frowned. Is it because of us? Did we do something wrong? Mark's heart broke at the question. He reached out, pulling both boys into a hug. No, no, absolutely not. This has nothing to do with you. You and Ethan are the best things that ever happened to me. None of this is your fault. Ethan sniffled, his voice trembling. But why, Dad? Why can't you just fix it? Mark swallowed hard. Sometimes, things can't be fixed, no matter how much you want them to be. Your mom and I, we've grown apart, and she made some choices that hurt our family. But I promise you, we'll get through this. Together. The boys clung to him, their small bodies shaking with emotion. Mark held them tightly, his own tears falling silently. He hated that they had to go through this, hated that their world was being torn apart. But he knew he couldn't stay with Sarah, not after what she had done. The next morning, Mark handed Sarah the divorce papers as she sat numbly at the kitchen table. She barely looked up, her face pale and drawn. The confidence and self-assurance that had once defined her were gone, replaced by the hollow shell of a woman who had lost everything. Mark didn't wait for her to say anything. He simply picked up his keys and left, heading to his lawyer's office to finalize the paperwork. As he drove, he thought about the road ahead. It wouldn't be easy. The boys would have questions, struggles, and moments of anger. He'd have to rebuild his life from the ground up. But he knew one thing for sure, he'd do it for them. For Logan. For Ethan. And for himself. Because he deserved better. They all did.